All right. Good Friday morning, everyone, and welcome to the Urban Ecology Center's Backyard Naturalist. My name is Tim, and I will be your host this week. And today is a very special day here in Milwaukee. Not only is it May 9th, and the weekend is here, it's also day one of the Brew City Birding Festival, which is a 10-day citywide festival of birds that we will visit together in a minute. And this episode that you are witnessing is the very first event of the festival. So let's celebrate birds. We're visiting a bird today, this because it's the birding festival. And while we often focus on the backyards of Milwaukee, Midwest, northern US, where the show originates, you might think there's not flamingos in Milwaukee, but that's not really the case, as we shall see. And so I hope you have a nice warm beverage as you sit in front of the soft warm glow of your electronic device as we plunge our heads into the water, the muddy waters of episode 34 of season 6, Beach Blanket Flamingo. But first, I do need to give a bright pink thank you to you, our viewers, and especially to our subscribers whose financial support allows this program to continue. We are super grateful for you. We have a level of support called the super subscription, and with that, you get an extra level of participation, which is unfeathered access to the Green Spaces Familiar Faces program, one of my favorite new programs where we enlist local personalities to take us to their favorite green spaces. And the next familiar face will be State Representative Darren Madison, who I met as a kid. Well, he was a kid, I was an adult. He grew up on my block, and he was a young scientist at the Urban Ecology Center. I often walk him home afterwards in the snow and just talk about life. And now Darren is State Representative Darren Madison, part of the Socialist Caucus of the state government, one of the nicest human beings you will ever meet. He always brings a smile to my face and joy to my life. So I hope you can join us for this walk. The program is included in your super subscription, but anyone can join us. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. And as I mentioned, it is finally here. The Brew City Birding Festival has arrived. If you look forward to spring migration or if you're new to observing birds, the next 10 days has some really wonderful programming for you to get involved in. So after this program on flamingos, there's two more events happening today. There's the festival keynote on the important topic of bird-friendly coffee, which is happening this evening at Ware Nature Center. Uh, and and you can join the esteemed volunteer Eric Nelson, who will be walking with Washington Park land manager Emily Helm on a plant-bird intersection themed program because plants are important to birds and birds are important to plants. And that program is happening this afternoon, 1:30 right here at the UEC Washington Park. Tomorrow is the biggest day of birding for the Urban Ecology Center with our slightly competitive and fun celebration of birds, the Green Birding Challenge, along with the Youth and Family Challenge. And also tomorrow, there's fantastic events at Schlitz Audubon and Ware Nature Center and Lake Park. For Mother's Day, there's no excuse not to take your mother or someone else in your life or yourself birding with events at Lakeshore State Park and Ware Nature Center. And then on Monday, uh, you can go on a trip to Horicon Marsh with James Shedd and Brittany Peters, unless that is sold out, which might be the case. It sells out pretty quickly. You can always check on that. And they are teaming up with partners at the International Crane Foundation. And if you want to stay closer to home, there's birding at Estabrook Park. On Tuesday, and a BIPOC birding club event on Monday night at Washington Park. And on Tuesday, there is a raptor program at Humboldt Park from our friends at Schlitz Audubon and their amazing raptor programs, where you can come on a bilingual bird walk with the Urban Ecology Center Menominee Valley branch, bilingual Spanish-English, or you can do the biathlon of boating and birding together. It's as easy as chewing gum and walking. And you can bird by canoe at the UEC Riverside Park. And then on Wednesday, there's another BIPOC Birding Club Urban Ecology Center event. Again, if I'll mention another quick shout out, if you haven't listened to the Bird Joy podcast, One of the founders of the BIPOC Birding Club of Wisconsin, Dexter Patterson, does an amazing podcast with his colleague up in Philadelphia for In Color Birding, and they just began season 3 of their podcast, which is just a wonderful thing to listen to. And some of these walks, like the BIPOC walk, is nice because it's in the early evening. I know for some it's hard to get up early or you're working, so having both morning and afternoon/evening bird walks is really nice about the festival this year. There's another morning walk at the UEC at Washington Park, and another evening walk, Schlitz Audubon, or you can check out a really fun group called the Mindful Mending at the Urban Ecology Center, who will be, for this gathering of Mindful Mending, putting birds on it. And if you're not sure what that means, I might be able to share a video at the end or share it with you an email. And there's then, let's see, trying to keep up with all of this. Next Thursday, there's another bird walk at Riverside Park. There's some fun events at the UEC at Washington Park, which includes a bird-themed board game night, and another opportunity to bird in the water or above the water in the safety of the lake at Washington Park. I have a colleague who keeps reminding me that it is not a lagoon, Mike Larson, if you know him, because lagoons are tied to other bodies of water. So we can debate that later. And then next week, right here on Backyard Naturalist, we're going to be joined by one of my favorite hosts and human beings, Bill Miller, who's going to talk a little bit more about the state of bird conservation. And then on Saturday, May 17th, with migration still in full swing, more events all over the city, Schlitz Audubon, and then some of my other favorite locations around here, the Forest Exploration Center, which we just visited yesterday, really beautiful area near the county grounds, and then Havenwood State Forest, and then Forest Home Cemetery, which is just another wonderful local gem. And then on Saturday the 18th, you can rest, or Sunday the 18th, you can rest and try to reflect and bask in all the birding glory and get ready for next year's festival. So a lot going on. Again, you can see all of this on the website, the Visit Milwaukee Brew City Birding Festival. Okay, and I know we're not all in Milwaukee, so we're here to talk about a really cool bird. And I do want to give credit to 3 of my go-to sources for information that I generously use for most episodes, including this one. So the Stuff You Should Know podcast, the How Stuff Works website, and the Mental Floss website. Okay, so maybe one of the most recognizable birds at a young age. You start to parcel the birds apart, and you start to learn the groups of birds. This is one that I think you learn pretty soon, no matter your age. It's pink, it's graceful, fantastic, awesome, flamboyant. It uses its bill upside down, and it's pink. So a lot of great places to start, but we will start where we often do, from a systematic perspective. So the flamingo is, of course, a bird, which is an animal. It's a real group of animals, unlike the fish. We love them for a lot of reasons, partly because they're living dinosaurs. And then within this large, diverse group of animals that we call birds, the flamingos, and I say flamingos plural because there are somewhere between 5 and 6 species of flamingos, depending on who you talk to. This group of birds diverged a long time ago from the main branch of birds. So it's a very unique group of birds, very different. And they're within their own order with a unique name, the Phoenicopteriformes, which had more species of flamingos that a lot of them are now extinct. And the people who study phylogeny, which is the evolutionary relationships of organisms, not to be confused with phenology, which is the studying the seasonal timing of events, or phrenology, which is the bumps on your head, I think. But early phylogenists grouped the flamingos with storks and herons, And why wouldn't you? They look alike. They're kind of tall and gangly, and particularly the early scientists, Linnaeus and others like the Western scientists, really like to group things together that shared similar physical characteristics. And that's a uh, phenomenon that cultures around the world share. Grouping, it's just a kind of a natural human um, desire to group things and try to make sense of the world. But then when we learned a little bit more, and the scientists said, well, I don't think flamingos and storks and herons are related. So we're going to group the flamingos now with the geese, the swans, and the ducks, the Anatidae. And this happened quite recently, around the beginning of like right around 2000. And I can't confirm this, but I think the main push to move flamingos to this group was when scientists realized that both flamingos and swans love Valentine's Day. But then those scientists that, probably getting their funding from Hallmark were overridden by scientists that used actual genetic data, and they said, nice try. The evidence now says that, and this is as recently as 2014, just over a decade ago, that supports now that the closest relatives of the flamingo with our best evidence currently are the grebes. And in fact, there are extinct species of flamingos that likely behaved a lot like the grebes. They were swimmers and they dove, and it'd be really cool to think of a swimming and diving flamingo today. Um, but think about that next time you see a flamingo or next time you see a grebe. Those are the closest relatives to each other. Um, and then the flamingo settled into their own unique niche among the birds um, that wade in the water. The modern flamingos don't swim, but they do wade, and they belong to the family Phoenicopteridae. And so this is the family that includes the flamingos. Again, all 5 or 6, depending on who you talk to. At least the flamingos that are alive today. So 4 of them in the Americas, and two species in the Old World, in Africa and Eurasia. Um, so a, a group of flamingos, and again, because Carolyn Washburn's here, we're going to talk about the etymology of this. A group of flamingos has several names. You can call them a regiment, a flurry, or a stand. But well, I don't know why you'd use any of those when you have the other word for a group of flamingos, which is a flamboyance of flamingos. And the English name flamingo comes from Portuguese Spanish flamengo, which means flame colored, and also the Spanish word for Flemish. So if you're in Spain, there's 2 reasons that you could be called a flamingo. One is you were born in Flanders or you're from Flanders in Belgium. They could call you flamingo. Or 2, if you are the actual bird, they're both called flamingos. And if you're familiar with Greek terms, the Latin phoenicopterus means crimson feathered, and the phoenix of legend that rises from the ashes was depicted with bright red feathers, like the flame and ashes from which they rose. So, flame-colored bird, and uh, so we can quickly go through the current species that are around on our planet. So the first one is the greater flamingo. As the name implies, this is the largest of all the flamingos. Uh, and it is 5 feet tall. It weighs 9 pounds, which may not seem like a lot, but for a flying bird, that's decently heavy, a 9-pound flying bird. And they're found again in the old world. And this is where when I talk about there's either 5 or 6 species, this is where this comes from. This is so you have the American or Caribbean flamingo here in the American side of the world. According to some, these are 2 different species, and some say these are 2 subspecies of the same. And the the thought may have to do with their food source, which we'll revisit in a bit. But the American flamingo, as a group, tends to be much brighter in their pink and orange hue than the greater flamingo, which is decently paler. Then you have the Chilean flamingo, and you can probably guess where they're found. This is a much more cold tolerant bird than the other flamingos. And they have a lot of flamingos, depending on the species, need to be somewhat cold tolerant, whether they're farther towards the poles or they're higher up in mountains. But the Chilean flamingo, from identification purposes, has that nice like orange wristband. Technically, that's its ankle, um, and uh, and then it also has the slippers on the feet, the orange slippers. Then you have the smallest of the flamingos, the lesser flamingo, um, and again, it seems a little indignant that any bird should be called the lesser, but this is the smallest. It's 3 to 5 pounds and found in eastern southern Africa and into um, southern Asia, Pakistan, India, and Yemen. And then you have the Andean flamingo is next. That's way up in the Andes Mountains. I'm not sure I have a picture of this. They're quite rare. There's only 80,000 left in the wild, and they are under extreme threat from both climate change and also lithium mining. So something to think about if you're purchasing lithium batteries. That's not uh, that industry is not very good to the Andean flamingo, which is listed as vulnerable. And then this is the flamingo I got so excited I probably just skipped the Andean flamingo because got to be the coolest names ever. So James's flamingo, named after the renowned ornithologist James Shedd from the Urban Ecology Center. Some would argue that they're named after the British naturalist Harry Berkeley James. And from the 1920s through the 1950s, it was thought that James's flamingo was extinct until they found them in large groups, mixed in with other flamboyances of Chilean and Andean flamingos. And I think when you first begin to learn about flamingos and or any bird, you kind of learn the fun facts. And so probably the first fun fact you like to impress your friends with about flamingos is to do with their color. And we quickly, as a group of humans that is fascinated with animals and likes to keep them in captivity, domesticate them, show them off, quickly learned that this when you put a flamingo in captivity, that pinkish orangish color will tend to disappear. And quickly learned that it's because they get that color from their food source. They eat algae that are rich in beta carotene, carotenoids, and so again, when zoos first started showing flamingos, they were, they wanted the pink. That pink is important if you're going to show it to people. And then when it was realized that they got their pink from their food, a lot of places just started feeding them things like carrots and red peppers to keep them pink, which is not cool, unhealthy. And now, I mean, in modern times, zoos have switched to a more natural diet, which then keeps them healthy and pink. And fun fact, we as humans can also have our skin turned a color when we eat foods rich in carotenoids like carrots and sweet potatoes and mangoes. If we eat a lot or too much of these, our skin can take on an orangish hue. I've seen it. And a carrot lover friend of mine, and this condition is called caratinemia. So if you want to channel your inner flamingo, you can give it the old college try and just see how many carrots you can eat uh, in a given time period. There's actually probably don't do it. There's probably an unhealthy reason to do that. But the other thing that we notice, or another thing we notice quickly about flamingo behavior, is the unique way in which they feed. So it's more like a humpback whale than a bird. They will often stir up the mud flats that they're in, uh, stir up the bottom with their feet, and then they stick their bills down in the water in the mud, and they use their tongue to swish water very rapidly, like when you're swishing mouthwash, but very rapidly, 4 times a second, through a comb-like, baleen-like filter on the upper bill. And then when their head's on the water, the upper bill becomes the lower bill. And then the algae themselves are not pink, but the algae that gets stuck in the filter makes their way into the digestive system, and then the liver breaks down the carotenes into the pigment candescanthin, which then gives them that, again, pinkish or orangish hue. And so then if we go back to that debate about whether the greater and American flamingo are the same species or not, the argument that keeping them together is that the main difference between the two isn't in their genetics, but in their food sources. So um, the argument is that the American flamingo diet is just richer in carotenes, but otherwise they're the same species. So um, that debate will continue. And just for a quick here, again, 5 or 6 species of flamingo, you can see them next to each other, various shades of orange, pink, white, um, and decently large birds. Another crazy fact that's almost as cool as James having his own flamingo is that they're very long-lived. So they can live 20 to 60 years, depending on the species and the conditions. And then the Adelaide Zoo had a greater flamingo that they called Greater, great name, that lived to be 83 years old. And so very long-lived species, particularly in captivity. Despite their long, lanky appearance, flamingos are amazing flyers. They can easily cover 300 to 400 miles in a night, flying 30 to 40 miles an hour. They are not migratory species, but they will move great distances when conditions call for it, similar to, wildebeest that are looking for, food sources. It's not always that regular, but if they need to find greener pastures, then they can fly great distances. And, they do live in fairly unique habitats, but it just, looking at this thing doesn't even look like physically to me that this thing could fly. And for those of you who remember, it reminds me a little bit of watching the 76ers Manute Bol play basketball. I mean, super tall. I think he had more rebounds in his career than points, which is or block shots or something like that. Who could play very well, but when you just, it just seemed like he was all arms and legs. And so another flamingo behavior that we tend to think of is when they stand on one leg. And they're certainly not the only birds that stand on one leg. It's pretty common, in particular some of the taller or shorebirds, in particular the waterfowl and shorebirds and other things. And for for a decently long time, we thought that flamingos, or scientists thought that flamingos stood on their one leg uh, for a similar reason that we think a lot of birds like them stand on one leg, and that is heat retention to conserve body heat. So if you go back to the winter ecology episode, we talk a little bit about countercurrent heat exchange in the legs, where warm blood leaving the body um, is cooled when it gets down to ice or cold water, but then as it's coming back into the body, it's warmed by the position of other arteries, and it's just a very efficient way of moving blood out to the cold and back into the body. So what what is becoming a more likely explanation for why flamingos do this has to do more with just the physics of their anatomy. And it just seems like for this bird, it's just a more stable position for resting. So they lock their tendons and their muscles and joints, and if they're going to be standing in that position for a long time, it makes it easier on their body. And so similar to when you look at perching birds and the way their tendons work so that at rest their feet are clutching branches, and it just allows them to sleep while clutching. And then if they want to let go of the branch, they have to put effort into it and energy into it. So it's thought that for flamingos, at least, this is more of a mechanical, anatomical way of doing things. And then it also just from there are things that like to eat flamingos. And so this way you can kind of stand in the middle of a salt flat where few predators are going to want to go. And for defense and group defense, you have a way of of hearing things that might sneak up on you. And also, if you're out there, you wouldn't want your body to be in that water if you're not a duck or a goose that's used to being in the water like that. So there's probably multiple reasons. It's not just one thing or the other. But the uh, when you look at the likely adaptations, it could be more just of a physical thing rather than uh, the heat exchange explanation. Again, probably both are somewhat involved. Then if you were to continue down the list of characteristics that most people know of, so you have the pink color, you have the unique feeding behavior, you have the standing on one leg. Another characteristic that you find quickly is just the immense groups, the immense sizes of the colonies. And these flamboyances can reach easily tens of thousands of birds, hundreds of thousands of birds, very common, and possibly up to 1 million or more strong. And scientists believe in, and when you think of an adaptation, if you're going to be in a group with that many birds, that's going to go hand in hand with your adaptations, your behavioral adaptations, your social adaptations, your uh, physiological adaptations. And it's not surprising then that flamingos we are finding are incredibly social. There's complex relationships within groups. You have your rivals and your cliques, um, and and for such a social bird, they also engage in what's called serial monogamy, meaning that they're with the same partner for a full breeding cycle. They are monogamous within that cycle. Not all birds are like that. Some birds that are, monogamous are still socially fooling around. But for flamingos, they're monogamous for a breeding season, but then the next breeding season, they'll likely be with another pair, and they'll be monogamous with them. So it's the same partner year round, but they may choose a new partner for the following year. There isn't a breeding season per se. So breeding can happen year round when conditions are good, but then there's synchrony within a group. So they're going to time their breeding behavior with others in the group and raising young, and there's some advantages to that. And they they have some really fun dancing rituals, which we'll watch at the end of this for those of you watching this live. Courtship and pretty much all of the parental behavior is, at least from what we understand, done equally by both sexes. So courtship, the it the most sought after partners, as far as we can tell, there's a lot of dancing. There's a lot of dancing, moving moving the head, moving the wings, moving the feet. Um, and it seems to be that the most lively dancers and the ones that switch between moves the quickest are the ones that are likely most successful. So a behavior that seems to have maybe rubbed off on humans. Also during courtship, both males and females have a gland near their tail. A lot of birds have this gland for waterproofing their feathers. The particular gland in flamingos is very carotenoid oil rich. So the oil itself is very bright pink, and then the birds use this bright pink at pretty much like makeup. So they will rub their bills with this oil to make their bills just kind of pop out and be really shiny and bright. They will put it on their wings and basically make themselves brighter than normal. And you see this in a lot of birds where they're brightest at the breeding season, but usually that's a feather molt type of thing. And this is a behavioral pattern where the birds dress themselves up for the breeding season, and then they stop when the breeding season is over, and they all just kind of go back to their drab pattern or less shiny pattern. So again, it's kind of using it like a makeup to make yourself more attractive. Um, After mating, males and females raise one egg together. It's often in a raised ground nest to get it up from the water, which is often very harsh, saline, alkaline, muddy water that a lot of other animals can't even live in. Um, they the eggs are in that nest for about a month, and then flamingos are also one of the unique birds in that they produce milk. The milk is not from a mammary gland. The milk is called crop milk, and it's produced along the digestive glands that are along their digestive tract. In the case of flamingos, it's not a white milk. It's very fat rich and high in carotenoids, and it looks a lot like blood. There's also red blood cells in that milk. So it it looks weird when you see like, what looks like blood dripping down here. But this is actually just regurgitating. I don't know if it's regurgitating. It's just producing that milk from their digestive tract. I guess it's kind of well, anyway, a little bit of a regurgitation, but it's their milk, and they feed it to their young, and it's very, very red. So again, it can be, you look at something and really confused as why there's blood everywhere, but it's actually milk. When the chicks hatch, they're obviously cute and gray. They're in the nest for about a week, and then they do this awesomely adorable thing where they essentially go to daycare. And the young gather in these groups called creches, and they hang out. And not everyone's mom and dad in there. In fact, there's only a few of the adults in the community that are watching over them, usually younger adults, and that's about as daycare as you can get in the non-human animal world. And um, and then they're kind of use that as a learning and growing period, and then they start to um, get the rich pink red in their diet, and then they start to resemble the pink adults that we know, better. Like many iconic animal species, humans have been paying attention to them for a long time. So you have cave paintings in southern Spain that date back to 7000 BCE. They're depicted in ancient Egyptian art. They're depicted in art in all cultures around the world where humans and flamingos have coexisted. And in ancient Rome, it was said the flamingos were said to be a delicacy. So Pliny the Elder wrote that the flamingo tongue in particular has the most exquisite flavor. And the Stuff You Know podcast, they mentioned that writer Molly Olmstead from Slate looked into and was shocked at how many Google searches there are for "Can you eat a flamingo?" Um, so, having never eaten a flamingo, you can only talk about what you know from others. Uh, Probably a fishy diet with all the algae they're eating. A lot of ducks. Again, I don't eat ducks very often. Are said because of the fat that they need are said to be delicious. So um, I don't know if I'll ever know what a flamingo tastes like, but people have been eating them for a long time. And then, similar to egrets and herons in the 1800s, in particular, flamingos, and before that, um, flamingos were killed for their feathers and that were put in fashion um, clothes, hats, and in recent history that resulted in some decent population declines. But with increased awareness, some populations are rebounding, and as is the case with humans that are the cause of the decline, we are also getting fairly active in trying to conserve them. So zoos in particular are trying to help with breeding programs. And it, again, if you take any animal out of their wild and put them in a zoo, whether or not they're going to breed is a question. And for a long time, it seemed that captive flamingos are just not into each other. And then recently, scientists started were looking at mating behavior that thought that part of the mating courtship behavior uh, for most wild flamingos happens in very, very large groups. And so there is something called the Ali effect in conservation biology that for certain behaviors within a population of an animal or plant, often it's feeding or courtship and mating or group defense. There's kind of a critical number, a critical minimum number of animals for some of these behaviors to be effective. And if you get too few animals, then some of these behaviors will break down. So it's probably why, for example, the passenger pigeon went from being the most numerous bird on the planet to extinct so quickly. And it turns out that for successful reproduction, flamingos need large groups. And so in a, or likely, that's part of it. And so in a zoo in England, in a stroke of thinking outside the box, they put up full-length mirrors around their breeding flock just to make it look as if the group was much bigger, and that appeared to have worked. So an interesting way of, again, it's there's so many factors that are likely affecting this behavior, but for flamingos, it seems to be that for successful mating, you need large groups. So it, in theory, ended up working, and in practice ended up working, at least for captive breeding. There's a couple of recently famous flamingos that encourage you to check out next time you're in an internet rabbit hole. So in the Denver Zoo, there was a same-sex flamingo couple called Freddie Mercury and Lance Bass, both males, both different species that ended up being surrogate parents for breeding couples that had abandoned their eggs. And both males showed a strong affinity for each other and for success and for raising chicks successfully. And it ended up being. But then again, we know that it's same sex, different species, and we know that they're serial monogamists. So eventually, the two males eventually lost interest in each other, and that relationship ended. There's also the story of Pink Floyd, who escaped from the Tracy Aviary in Salt Lake City and landed in the Great Salt Lake, and which is not, flamingos are not native to that area. But if you think of it's a very saline lake, and flamingos are really adapted to those types of environments. Pink Floyd took up very well as an escapee, as naturalized in the Great Salt Lake, and he became famous locally. There was a group called the Friends of Floyd, and they were strongly advocating to release more flamingos in the Great Salt Lake so that Pink Floyd wouldn't be so lonely. Thankfully, that didn't happen, and I can send you a link to that story as well. And that's the flamingo. And here in Milwaukee and the Northeast in Massachusetts, we do have flamingos, lots of the plastic varieties in people's yards. And was it last year? 2 years ago? Last year? We had flamingos right here in Lake Michigan up near Port Washington. And they were vagrants, very hard to believe, but it
Like
is
2 or 3
possible.
years ago already.
You're kidding me.
No.
Oh boy. So for flamingos, one of the likely reasons for their success is that they're able to thrive in some of the harshest places on the planet. They do very well in areas of extreme salinity, extreme alkalinity, mud flats, alpine, cold. Their delicacy and grandeur are matched with extreme hardiness. And hopefully you get the chance to see one in the wild or in domestication. They're goofy and graceful. There are a ton of wonderful videos. I'll send you a few links that are just laughable and amazing. They're rough and remarkable. And if you stick around long enough, you might just see one here in Lake Michigan. So thank you for joining me today. I will stop sharing my screen.